I was trying to declutter my house before moving in a few months, so I decided to sell some old tools on Craigslist. They were still in good condition, but I had recently upgraded to battery-powered ones. I posted a listing for a power drill and tool set at $80, which I thought was a fair deal. Within an hour, I got 2 responses. One person tried lowballing me at $50, which I politely declined. The other was eager to buy at full price and wanted to pick them up that evening. We agreed to meet at 5 p.m. I never let buyers inside my house, preferring to meet in my driveway. It was a busy neighborhood, so I felt safe. But at 4:30, before our scheduled time, there was an unexpected knock at my door. Peeking through the window, I saw a man standing there, his red car parked in my driveway. He claimed to be the buyer and admitted he was early. I told him to wait in his car while I gathered the tools. He hesitated, making things a little awkward, but eventually walked back to his vehicle. When I met him outside, he tested the tools, seemingly satisfied. But then, holding the drill, he suddenly asked, "How about 20 bucks?" I was annoyed. He had already agreed to $80. I told him I could go a little lower, but not that low. Without another word, he put the drill down and walked back to his car, driving off without buying anything. Frustrated, I put the tools away and moved on with my night. But a couple of hours later, I spotted his red car parked down the street, a few houses away. It was empty, so I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. I ignored it, but 30 seconds later, another knock. Then I heard his voice. "Hey, it's me. I changed my mind. I brought the money." I knew he was lying. That car had been parked down the street for a while. He'd been watching my house. I didn't respond. Instead, I called the police and gave them his name and vehicle description. He kept knocking, calling out that he wanted the tools. Then there was silence. A minute passed. Then another. Curious but cautious, I quietly approached the window by the door. Suddenly, a loud thud hit the side of my house, followed by rustling leaves and hurried footsteps. Looking out, I saw the man limping toward his car. Before he could escape, police arrived, blocking his path. He later admitted he had planned to rob me, but couldn't find a way inside. Turns out, he had tried climbing a tree to jump onto my roof, but missed, crashing into the side of my house and injuring his leg. Worse yet, he had a knife on him, and the window he was trying to reach, it was unlocked. If he had made that jump, he could have gotten inside. That was the last time I ever used Craigslist. Even now, I double-check every lock on my windows, especially the ones I used to think were unreachable. Years ago, I used Craigslist to find a room for rent. After searching for about a week, I found a listing that seemed perfect, a house outside of town, shared with a guy around my age named Aaron. He seemed friendly over the phone, and everything checked out. Excited to move in, I packed my things and drove 30 minutes to my new home. The house, however, was not what I expected. The listing mentioned it was an older home, but this place looked ancient, at least 100 years old. The interior pictures from Craigslist made it seem modern, so I assumed they had renovated it. When Aaron greeted me at the door and showed me around, my worries faded. The inside was completely different, clean, updated, and comfortable. I moved in that night. For the first few days, everything was normal. Aaron worked in town, so I had the house to myself most of the time. But one thing stood out. There was a locked door that he never mentioned that I assumed it was a basement, though he had never told me the house had one. I didn't ask. It wasn't my business. But something about it felt off. Then, things got weird. One night, Aaron brought home fast food, ate quickly, and went to bed early. I stayed up watching TV, eventually heading to bed myself. But as I lay there, struggling to sleep, I heard his bedroom door creak open. I listened, waiting for footsteps. Nothing. Then, after a couple of minutes, I heard slow, deliberate steps moving down the hall toward my door. They stopped. Silence. Then a soft thump against my door like he was pressing against it. He stayed there motionless. I barely breathed. Finally, he moved away, but instead of returning to his room, I heard another door open, the locked one. This became a pattern. Every night, he would leave his room, stop at my door, then disappear into the locked room. One night, I decided to confront him. As soon as he opened the basement door, I stepped into the hallway. "Hey, Aaron, everything okay?" He froze. His wide eyes stared at me, startled. I pressed on. "Why do you keep going in there every night?" For a moment, he just stood there silent. Then, as soon as I took a step toward him, he bolted, sprinting out the back door and vanishing into the woods. Terrified, I locked the doors, grabbed a kitchen knife, and stood before the open basement door. I hesitated. There was no light switch. The walls were old, decayed wood. It looked completely untouched, unlike the rest of the house. I debated whether to go down. Instead, I grabbed my bags, threw them in my car, and drove away without looking back. I never heard from Aaron again. Years later, curiosity got the better of me, and I looked up the house online. It had been demolished. An article mentioned it had been abandoned for months, ever since Aaron ran into the woods that night. The article also stated that the house was torn down due to criminal findings. It didn't say what those findings were. To this day, I wonder what was behind that locked door. 3 years ago, I had just moved into a rental house and needed a bigger TV for my living room. Since I was on a budget, I searched Craigslist and found an older flat screen for a good price. The seller, Mitch, responded the next morning. His email was oddly enthusiastic, almost too excited, but I chalked it up to him being an overly friendly guy. We agreed to meet at 6:30 p.m. the next day, and strangely, he even sent me a Google Calendar invite. I thought it was weird, but it didn't really matter. When I arrived at his house that evening, all the lights were on, but the front door was slightly ajar. I hesitated, but rang the doorbell. Instantly, I heard something drop inside the house, followed by silence. A bad feeling crept over me. Just as I decided to leave, footsteps approached. The door opened slightly wider, revealing a man. "Need something?" he asked, half hidden behind the door. Confused, I explained I was there for the TV. After a pause, he muttered, "All right," and let me in. Something felt off. This man wasn't acting like Mitch from the emails. He wasn't friendly. He was tense. The TV was right next to the door, so I quickly handed him the cash and prepared to grab it. Instead, he stuffed the money in his pocket, then suddenly shoved me backward, yelling, "Get out!" I didn't argue. I ran. After calling the police, I learned the truth. The man who attacked me wasn't Mitch. Mitch had been attacked just before I arrived by another Craigslist buyer who had come for a different item. The intruder had accepted Mitch's calendar invite, revealing his real name. He was arrested days later. And Mitch, he turned out to be the kind, happy old man I originally expected to meet. Craigslist, a place where opportunity meets desperation. But for some, it becomes a gateway to nightmares they'll never forget. Craigslist has always been a last resort for me. I rarely used it, maybe once a year if that. But when you need to sell something fast, it's hard to beat. That all changed 3 years ago when I had an experience so terrifying that I'll never use the site again. At the time, I was 22 and living in a small house with a roommate. When my roommate moved out, I knew I couldn't keep up with the rent on my own. I found a smaller apartment, but it meant letting go of most of my furniture, including a nearly new couch. My roommate and I had bought it just a year earlier, and it was barely used. Tossing it to the curb seemed like such a waste, so I decided to sell it on Craigslist to make some extra cash for the move. After a couple of weeks, I got a response from someone genuinely interested. He introduced himself as David and even called me to ask a few questions about the couch. He seemed polite and friendly, and his story matched mine. He just moved into a new place and needed some cheap furniture. We arranged for him to come by one Saturday evening. When 6 o'clock rolled around, I left the front door open and waited. An hour passed with no sign of him, so I closed the door and headed to the kitchen to make dinner, assuming he wasn't coming. Then, at about 7:30, the doorbell rang. I was annoyed but tried to brush it off. I opened the door to find a tall, heavy-set man grinning widely. "I'm David," he said, offering a handshake. I invited him in and led him to the living room to check out the couch. Everything seemed normal until I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see 2 more men entering my house. "These are my buddies. They're moving in with me," David said casually. My stomach dropped. I forced a nervous smile, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. David knelt down, pretending to inspect the couch closely. "What's this over here?" he asked, pointing to the side. The other 2 men stepped closer, standing behind me. Reluctantly, I leaned down to look. "I don't see anything," I said. "There's nothing there," David said suddenly, slapping my back harder than necessary. His friends smirked, their expressions cold and calculating. I tried to hurry things along. "Do you like it?" I asked, hoping to get them out of my house. David's demeanor changed. The grin faded, replaced by an unsettling, vacant stare. One of the men suddenly tackled me to the ground, pinning me down with brute force. I couldn't fight back. David and the other man tore through my house, grabbing anything of value. After a few minutes, David called out, and the man holding me finally let go, sprinting out the door. I lay on the floor in shock as I heard their truck speed away. When I finally managed to lock the door, I called the police. Unfortunately, David wasn't his real name, and his email and phone number led nowhere. The only clue police had were shoe prints matching another break-in weeks earlier, where the victim had also been alone. Looking back, I realized my mistake. I had mentioned my roommate was gone, essentially advertising that I was alone. That one detail made me an easy target. Sites like Craigslist can be a gamble. Be cautious and never invite strangers into your home unless you're absolutely sure it's safe. I wasn't in the best financial position when I decided to buy a truck off Craigslist. The prices were appealing, and I figured it was worth a shot. I'd never used the site before, but I'd heard it was a decent place to find cheap deals. After some scrolling, I found an ad for a truck listed at $4,000. It sounded perfect for my budget, so I messaged the seller. He replied quickly, answering my questions in a way that felt honest. He admitted the truck wasn't in great shape, but assured me it was reliable. We agreed to meet at a Burger King halfway between our locations. I arrived first, taking an Uber since I didn't have another vehicle. A few minutes later, the seller pulled up in the truck. He seemed friendly enough, a middle-aged man who explained some minor issues the truck had in the past. "Nothing too serious," he said. When I asked to test drive it, he suggested heading to a quieter parking lot across the street. He offered to drive us there, and though I hesitated, I didn't want to seem rude. I told myself it was probably normal, but instead of crossing the street, he drove several blocks away to an empty lot. Alarm bells started ringing in my head. "All right, let's switch," he said, putting the truck in park. As we swapped places, he tossed me the keys. "Heads up," he called, but they landed far from me. I bent down to pick them up, and before I could react, he kicked me hard in the side. The next thing I knew, he was on top of me, ripping my wallet out of my pocket. Then he bolted back to the truck. Thinking quickly, I grabbed the keys from the ground, hoping I could use them as leverage. But when I tried to stop him, I realized they were fake. He sped off, leaving me stranded. I couldn't even get the license plate because everything happened so fast. I called the police from my phone, but without much information to go on, a description of the truck and an average-looking man. They couldn't do anything. The ad disappeared, and the seller's email was a dead end. In the end, I lost $4,000 in cash and had to replace my cards and ID. The experience taught me a harsh lesson. When something feels off, trust your instincts. After leaving my job at a cleaning company, I started working independently, advertising on Craigslist. The pay was great, and for months, everything went smoothly, until I encountered the creepiest client of my life. The man contacted me about cleaning his house, sending a video walkthrough to help me estimate the time and cost. The house seemed spotless already, but that wasn't unusual. Some clients just want help maintaining their homes. We scheduled a cleaning, and when I arrived, he greeted me and showed me upstairs. Normally, clients leave me to work, but he lingered, watching me. His gaze made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. Then he said, "When I saw your ad on Craigslist, I knew I had to have you." At first, I thought it was just an awkward comment about my cleaning skills. I told him it would be easier if he left the room, and he agreed, but instead of leaving entirely, he moved to a nearby room where he could still watch me. As I worked, I noticed little things that didn't add up. He mentioned his wife had passed away in 2009, yet the bathroom had newer makeup products. There were no personal photos anywhere, not even holiday cards. When I moved to the kitchen, he asked me to vacuum the basement, even though I'd specified it wasn't included. I declined, offering to return another day. His demeanor changed instantly. "My wife and I really need it done," he said coldly. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Pretending to get a phone call, I stepped into another room and called a friend, explaining the situation in Spanish. She agreed to come over and wait outside until I left. I told the man I had a family emergency and couldn't finish. He stared at me with an icy expression. "Don't bother coming back," he said. I left without getting paid, but I didn't care. As I packed up, he stood by the window, watching me until I drove away. The police couldn't do much since he hadn't broken any laws, but the experience taught me to always trust my gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Craigslist, it wasn't my first choice for shopping, but I needed workout equipment, and the deal seemed too good to pass up. The house was quiet, unremarkable until I stepped inside. The man said Mary would be down soon, but something was off. The weight scattered on the floor, the bare walls, and then the way he lingered at the top of the stairs, staring at nothing. I knew I needed to leave, and when I did, he ran after me. The house had been empty for over a year. Then there was Tom. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The faint thud from behind the locked door sent chills down my spine. He kept urging me to check out the room, blocking my way when I tried to leave. What was behind that door? And Sam, the perfect roommate at first. Quiet, polite, friendly. But then came the smell, the locked door, the strange noises in the middle of the night. And when he disappeared, we learned the truth. Sam wasn't who he claimed to be. He'd been missing for almost a year. I trusted my instincts and escaped, but not everyone is so lucky. What would you do? Open the door? Run? Or stay and face what's waiting in the dark? Craigslist wasn't my first choice for shopping, but the cost of new workout equipment pushed me to browse its listings. After a few days, I stumbled upon a great deal, a set of weights recently listed by someone named Mary. I contacted her right away, and she quickly responded, offering to meet that evening around 7 p.m. When I checked the address she provided, it led to a quiet neighborhood I was somewhat familiar with. The house appeared old, but unremarkable, and nothing raised alarms. That evening, I drove there, parking near the mailbox and walking to the front door, which was already ajar. Feeling cautious, I knocked a few times. A man appeared in the hallway, explaining Mary would be down shortly and inviting me inside. The living room had weights on the floor, but no furniture, just bare walls. When I asked about the incomplete set, he said Mary might know where the rest were. He excused himself to check on her, but lingered oddly at the top of the stairs, staring at a wall. It dawned on me this was likely a setup. I turned to leave, but the man rushed after me. Ignoring his calls to stop, I bolted out the door and into my car. As I sped away, he emerged from the house, running around the side. I later called the police, who informed me that no one had lived in the house for over a year. The man's true intentions remain a mystery, but I'm grateful I trusted my instincts and escaped unharmed. After graduating college, I needed a place to stay while job hunting. Unable to afford an apartment alone, I started looking for spare rooms for rent. A friend suggested Craigslist, which had plenty of options, though responses were slow and often led to dead ends. One Saturday morning, I saw a new post for a room in a nearby house. It was affordable and included a private bathroom and closet. The owner, Tom, responded quickly, inviting me to view it that same afternoon. The house looked pleasant from the outside, a typical suburban home. When Tom opened the door, I noticed he was drenched in sweat and smelled terrible. He gave me a brief tour, showing off the messy kitchen and stained living room. It didn't match the pristine photos from the listing, but I figured those were taken long ago. As we headed to the stairs, Tom stopped at the bottom, gesturing for me to go up alone. I climbed hesitantly, glancing back to see him standing there, watching me. Reaching the hallway, I noticed the first door on the left, my supposed room. Just then, I heard a faint thud from behind the door. When I turned to Tom, his expression had shifted, his smile now gone. He dismissed the noise, claiming it was just a friend staying over. His insistence that I check out the room felt unnerving. Summoning my courage, I decided to leave. As I descended the stairs, Tom blocked my path, urging me to at least look at the bedroom. I firmly repeated my decision to leave. After a tense pause, he reluctantly stepped aside. I hurried out, relieved to escape. Later, I checked Craigslist and saw the post had been removed. I still don't know what or who was behind that door, but my instincts tell me I narrowly avoided something dangerous. During college, I rented a small house with my friend Nick. Initially, everything was fine, but by the end of our first year, we realized we couldn't afford the place without a third roommate. After striking out with friends, we turned to online platforms, including Craigslist, to find someone. Eventually, we received a response from a man named Sam. He seemed friendly and professional, and when he came to view the house, he appeared clean-cut and polite. He moved in the following week, and for a few months, everything went smoothly. But then, Sam grew distant. He barely spoke to us, kept to his room, and only came out for food or work. It wasn't disruptive, but his behavior seemed odd. One evening, Nick pulled me aside, whispering about a terrible smell coming from Sam's room. He asked me to check it out. As I walked down the hallway, the odor hit me hard, something foul and unnatural. We knocked on Sam's door several times, calling his name, but he didn't answer. The next morning, I caught Sam on his way out. When I asked about the smell, he brushed it off, claiming he'd taken out the trash. His quick, evasive response only deepened my unease. A few nights later, I woke to faint noises from Sam's room, like shuffling or movement. But by morning, he was gone, and this time, he didn't come back. Days turned into weeks, and his phone went straight to voicemail. Concerned, we checked his room. It was in disarray, with some items missing, as though he'd packed in a hurry. But strangely, he left behind furniture, clothes, and a pair of glasses, even though Sam didn't wear glasses. Nick called the police, who came to investigate. They later discovered the man we knew, as Sam wasn't who he claimed to be. A family member identified him as their son, who had been missing for nearly a year. We never heard from Sam again, and the case remains a chilling mystery. The thought that we lived with someone hiding a fake identity, and possibly something worse, still haunts me.